Good evening, everyone. My name is Tammy Rodman, and I am the Pilgrimage Director for Durham Cares. And I would like to welcome you this evening to our um, webinar, Moving Forward, a Global Pandemic, Racial Injustice, and Church Leadership in a Time of Crisis. Unfortunately, you can't see me. Having some technical difficulties on my end, I believe. But we have an awesome panel this afternoon, and we have Georie Bryant, who is our Church Mobilization leader at Durham Cares, will be facilitating as well. Let me tell you a little bit about how this part of the series came to be. We, a few weeks ago, just ended a 4-part series called Pilgrimage Through the Pandemic. And there also was such a need and some work being done with the East Durham Vital Worship Movement. They desired to have some information as to how to transition back into church because, of course, most of the churches have been closed during this time with the stay-at-home orders. And so we've got a lot going on in between that. In the middle of a pandemic, we've also had to deal with the light shining on an issue that has been with us forever, which is racism. And we saw it displayed in such an ugly way through the death of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Ahmaud Arbery. So on top of trying to transition back into church, the pastors are now having to navigate these issues, which involve all sorts of things, care, pastoral care, service to the community, just being able to preach a word during this time, as well as all of the stipulations that come with keeping your parishioners safe. So we're bringing the pandemic, the pilgrimage program, and the church mobilization together for this event. We will have 2 conversations, one, of course, tonight, and of course, we will have one on the 24th as well. I'm excited about the speakers that we have here this evening. We have Reverend Dr. Jonathan C. Augustine, pastor of St. Joseph AME Church. We all better known as Pastor J, I believe, to his parishioners. We also have Minister Amber Bergen, who also serves as a community health educator for that great university of mine, North Carolina Central University. And we have Mr. James Sansom from Self-Help, and he is over the faith-based sector. He is the faith-based sector director for Self-Help. And so I just want to thank each of you for taking your time out this afternoon, or this evening rather, and sharing with us. And basically, we want you all to just have a conversation with us about some of these things that we're witnessing now, and how do we move forward? How do we move forward? I'll start out with Mr. Sansom. How do we move forward, Mr. Sansom, with the work that you do? So share a little bit with us about the work that you do and what that, how that can help us to move forward as a body of believers.
Okay, great. Thanks for having me this evening. Glad to join the other panelists at this very critical time in our state and in our world. First of all, I'd just like to say quickly, for those of you who are not familiar with Self-Help, Self-Help was started in 1984 in Durham. And from its humble beginnings back in 1984, they first created the State Credit Union. From there, they created the Ventures Fund And then the third entity was the Center for Responsible Lending. And then the last or fourth entity was the Federal Credit Union, and that allowed self-help to acquire other credit unions throughout the nation. So self-help now, our footprint extends all the way to California. We're in 7 states and in the District of Columbia. And that's probably a reason why I joined self-help a little bit over a year ago. I'm a career commercial banker, and at this point in my career, I wanted to be with an organization that was very impactful. I had always worked with self-help throughout my whole banking career, so I knew the leadership there and was very impressed with the type of inertia that's created in all of the areas that they deal within, specifically small business and nonprofits and the faith organizations. That's been a pillar of lending for self-help since its origin. My life recently, since probably mid-March, has revolved around the CARES Act and specifically the Paycheck Protection Program. That has been a very rigorous program that's had a lot of twists and turns. But gratefully, the first tranche of funds, the $349 billion, went fairly quickly. And then they came back with a second tranche of funds for applicants. And that deadline period ends at the end of June 30th. And we've been very involved in that. To date, we've done right at 1,325 PPP loans. So we're one of the main lenders. I like to tell people we can do a lot with a little. We're not the largest organization, but we have a very committed staff. So that's been taking up a great deal of my time. On the faith side in particularly, in terms of the applicants, one thing could sometimes differ from a small church to a larger church is the how you calculate your eligible payroll. If you have 1099 recipients, they cannot be included under the church. And they can't be included under the church because they have the ability to apply directly for PPP loans. So if they're independent contractors, again, they can apply directly. Most of the churches will have to have W-2 wages as well as the pastor's housing allowance. When the program first started, the pastor's housing allowance wasn't considered. And that was just one of the changes that was made probably about a little bit over 3 or 4 weeks ago. So we've been happy with the program. Again, it's been all hands on deck for us. And we're here to make sure that any applicant that comes to us, we get them across the finish line, because some of it can be cumbersome, but we've been very active in the market, providing webinars on the PPP process. We've got one scheduled tomorrow for small businesses and nonprofits. And that can really take about 1 hour and 15 minutes, which is more detailed and really gets into the nuts and bolts of the PPP loans. So I'll stop now and don't want to extend my time.
Pastor Jay, okay.
George, yeah. I was going to ask you, did you have anything to ask Mr. Sansom at this time, or we'd come back around with some questions? If not.
I was going to move on to Pastor Jay, and we can move
Okay.
back, come back around.
Okay.
Pastor Jay, you want to give us a little bit about what it's been like for you during this time, just a small introduction and just what the change has been like?
Sure. Thank you so much. First and foremost, thank you to Durham Cares, and thank you to all of you for participating. Thank you for the invitation to be with you. It has been a whirlwind as I think about the topic for this evening, sort of where do we go from here in light of the twin evils of the pandemic of COVID-19 and obviously the racism that has been unearthed and just really exposed with full camera lens as of recent because of the unfortunate deaths obviously Ahmaud Arbery while jogging, obviously Breonna Taylor in her own apartment in Louisville, Kentucky, and in the world, the straw that broke the camel's back with George Floyd in the knee of oppression and the literal knee of a rogue law enforcement officer on his neck. Those deaths have caused a lens to be placed on the evil of racism that is called America's original sin. So as I think about what I've been through, and I think about where do we go from here, so to speak, I'm incredibly optimistic. Believe it or not, I'm incredibly optimistic. Whenever there is tragedy, there is always opportunity. As I think now about the space that African Americans are in, there was tragedy in 1963 with the assassination of President Kennedy. But that tragedy created opportunity because in 1964, the Congress passed the Civil Rights Act. There was tragedy on a day known as Bloody Sunday, where people assembled at Brown AME Church in Selma, Alabama, March the 7th, 1965. But later on in 1965, there was tremendous opportunity because we passed a Voting Rights Act. Here now, we have had, again, the tremendous tragedy that I referenced. But as I see a shift and as I see a turn, Black Lives Matter once upon a time was alienated, or it was isolated, if you will, to Black activists. It was the NFL snubbing its nose at Colin Kaepernick because of his active and progressive position in wanting to protest against a country that did not respect the rights of individuals that looked like him. Now I'm much more optimistic than I was just a few years ago. I'm optimistic because every time I turn on the television, I see a mainstream company, not a Black-owned company, but a mainstream company that is giving advocacy to Black Lives Matter. Just about every time I'm watching public protest, marches, nonviolent marches with people exercising their civic duty or exercising their First Amendment rights and being civically engaged, I'm seeing as many or more non-Blacks as I am Blacks participating in a Black Lives Matter movement. So from a Christian perspective, as I think about Pentecost and I think about people of different ethnicities coming together, different socioeconomic backgrounds coming together, America is undergoing another Pentecost right now, which will present tremendous opportunity in spite of the tragedy that we obviously have endured. So I just sort of say that as a baseline to say I'm very, very optimistic about our future and going forward in terms of racial reconciliation, our capacity to work with one another and to grow together. In terms of just briefly to reflect on where we are in the clergy seat, where pastors are right now, the leadership dynamic that's required, I think, to excel and to lead people in the space we're in now. As I think about Christian leadership and as I've studied Christian leadership, as I have done introspective reflection on myself as a Christian leader, there is a such thing as the Monis Triplex Doctrine, which basically says individuals lead in a threefold capacity, as a prophet, as a priest, and as a king. Or excuse me, to put it in non-gender specific terminology, they lead in the royal domain as a prophet, as a priest, or as a royal. This is a time for the prophet to shine, the one that speaks truth to power. This is the time for the ministers, for the clergy to speak their truths, and people will give voice right now. So that's a wonderful thing. This is time for the prophet to rise. This is also a time, because of the pandemic and because of the disproportionately adverse effects it's had in the African American community. This is a time for those who excel in priestly leadership, the conciliatory leadership that is in the hospital rooms and that is comforting people in their times of need and bereavement. This is a great opportunity for the priest to rise among us too. And certainly as I think about royal leadership or kingly leadership, if you will, this is a great time to give direction with new movements, to utilize social media, for example, in the context in which I serve at St. Joseph with a wonderful, wonderful congregation, where when I was assigned there, the average age probably was late 60s. Wonderful, loving people, but we're just starting to join Facebook, and I almost joke and say, you know, the young people are leaving Facebook. They're on Instagram, they're on Snapchat now, right? So it's an opportunity to really bridge the gap in many regards, to set a tone for the future as ministry obviously transitions now, just like ministry transitioned when you read the book of Acts with some tragedies that led to great opportunities in ways the gospel was spread more than 2,000 years ago. So having said that, I don't want to ramble, but those are sort of my initial thoughts on where we are now, where I feel I am as a leader, and more than anything, the optimism that I sense in terms of the future of what ministry looks like.
That's wonderful. With a great transition, Minister Amber, health educator, mental health professional, and priestly duties of shepherding our community. What does it look like for many of us stuck in our homes, dealing with what that does to the mind? For those of us who have the privilege to not have to go out, but even for some of us who are watching our friends and families suffer, how has this been for you, in the role that you play, and in many roles that you play?
Do you want me to start with an introduction, or just go right in?
You can introduce yourself.
Good evening. My name is Amber Bergen, and I wear many hats. Tonight, I am representing a multitude of places. As a mental health professional, I work as a professor at North Carolina A&T in the Department of Psychology, where I am attempting to train young minority minds in Black psychology in the middle of the coronavirus. And so it's amazing to see how important knowledge is becoming and has been, but I think particularly for young people, the amount of knowledge that they are limited to because of the way that our school systems have been, so many pieces to Black history and Black mental health that are missing for them that we're getting while in the midst of a trauma. And so that has been a very interesting place to see the work unfold. In addition to that, I also serve as a health outreach coordinator at North Carolina Central, where our primary focus has been health prevention from the form of cancer information. And in light of the coronavirus, have shifted our focus, not because cancer isn't important, but because a lot of the things that we do to prevent cancer are also the things that we could and should be doing to prevent the spread of the coronavirus. In particular, what we're eating, and how we're managing our internal stress and stress factors that are a part of our environment. And in addition to that, and probably definitely not last, I'm a young adult minister at Union Baptist Church here in Durham, North Carolina. And it's very interesting how all of these pieces come together. And then, of course, I'm still learning to get accustomed to the last title. I'm also the CEO and founder of Elijah's Farm. And so for me, watching how God has moved in this situation, a lot of the things that I do have become extremely necessary in the forefront for how we do the work going forward. And so for me, in the midst of the COVID, it's definitely been a learning process, but also trying to navigate the call to educate as many people as possible, not just on the relationship between our physical health and our mental health, but how those things culminate together for the health of our spirit. When I'm teaching students at A&T and various other places, one of the things that we talk about is how in the midst of the coronavirus, the same problem that we've had from the history of African American history from Africa to now is the same problem that we're experiencing now, is the concept of oppression, and how that oppression has been rooted not just in the way that we eat food and the way that we come together as a culture, also the way that we are divisive with one another and divisive within ourselves. But in addition to that, the way that we come to know the spirit has also been something that is often tainted because of the way that we do American church history and the way that the church is unfolded for Black people in America. And so here we are in the midst of the coronavirus, not just trying to teach people the importance of caring about what you eat and how it affects your immune system, but also the importance of, maintaining social boundaries in the middle of a culture that requires closeness, and how that translates to our relationship in the Black church. We are grieving a complex kind of grief for people who are at home, not just from the freedoms of being able to go out and do the things that we take for granted, but for a lot of people who are people of faith who also go to church, the relationship and the connection and how that feels from a psychological standpoint.
Did we lose Amber?
Who have multiple roles. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I think the storm might be moving your way.
Oh,
Yeah.
that I got a tornado warning while I was on call, but I was like, I'll just be here till the tornado comes and we'll be okay. So I'll try to make sure that let me know if you can't hear me. So it was,
Uh-oh. I think she cut
Yeah.
out.
She's cutting out. I guess it's, yeah, the storm must be wreaking a little bit more havoc, it appears. While we're trying to hopefully get Minister Amber back online, Pastor Jay, let me ask you a question concerning, I know St. Joseph's is a rather large church. What do you say to the small pastor, not the small pastor, but the small congregation, the small church, who may not have some of the resources that you all may have?
And I apologize. I heard you say, what do you say to the smaller churches, I guess, in terms of number, but I lost you in something. So repeat, please.
Oh, yeah. I was just asking, what advice or wisdom do you give the smaller church? Most of our larger churches were already streaming services. They already had certain technology in place and things like that. So, and maybe just more resources. So what do you tell this pastor of a congregation of maybe 100 or a couple?
I wanna share with you in the spirit of full disclosure. Just as I indicated, St. Joseph's median age probably was somewhere upper 60s when I arrived, and I was assigned to my pastorate there in May of 2019. We have since diversified. I'm proud to say we've since attracted a lot of younger people and reinstituted things that are indicia of a growing church, like nurseries and childcare and so forth, and church school. But I want you to know, on this webinar, my secret is St. Joseph was not streaming prior to the pandemic. So,
okay.
having said that, I sort of feel I feel blessed to be in this space that I'm in because I have been able to lead and shepherd a movement aimed at technology and really rooted in evangelism, an ability to uplift and to preserve and uplift and really share God's word by obviously by using technological advancements and so forth. I am big to say that when two or more are gathered together in the Lord's name, there he is in their midst. And it doesn't say you have to be physically gathered together. It can be telephonically, it can be electronically, it can be by whatever means, as long as you claim the power of Jesus and the power of the Holy Spirit. So I am proud to have ushered in that movement with the church. What I realized as I was in the process of doing it, and certainly conversing with some of my peers who pastor what I would call mega churches with thousands and thousands of people and thousands of people that perhaps were streaming, the difference now is that technology is the great equalizer. Technology, in my mind's eye, is much like education has been historically for African Americans, at least the thought process back with the passage of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act back in 1965, part of Lyndon Johnson's War on Poverty, was to make sure the playing ground, the level playing field rather, for everyone. Technology does that. So you can touch just as many people through a free service called Facebook Live as you can through a paid streaming service, and you can use your phone to do it, or use a minor laptop technology that most people have in this day and age, without incurring much expense or with incurring minimal expense, as well as taking advantage from a fiscal perspective and the opportunity to ask people to participate in the ministry of giving. There are apps that one can use. We use Givelify, for example, as well as PayPal. Cash App is also very popular. Givelify is an app that there's no contract for it. There's no a charge that the organization pays to use it. Givelify takes a small increment of the donation for the convenience of processing. But again, in terms of technology, if I'm going to give $100 and Givelify is going to take $1 or $1.50, the church has $98.50. Givelify has $1.50, and that's $98.50 the church otherwise would not have had. So their technology to me has been the great equalizer. That's what I've learned through this process, if that makes sense.
Thank you. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Georie, yeah. Do you have a question?
Yeah, for Mr. Sampson, for you in the work that you do to help pastors and churches through this time, how have you seen churches respond to the financial strain of COVID-19? And what has been some of the advice you've given them during this time? Even though trying to navigate what Pastor Jay talked about, the kind of the switch from being able to do that. How have you been able to advise during this time?
Sure. A few things, and I think some of the churches fall into two different groups. Some of them may not have any debt, and others may have debt. So if a church does have debt, the first thing they want to do is to make sure they call upon their lender and ask for any type of relief in terms of their repayment structure. So if they've been making monthly P&I payments, they need to ask for, well, can we defer this payment for 3 months? Can we go to interest only for 3 months? And again, most of the lending institutions are very accommodating at this time that we're going through with COVID. So that's the first thing you need to do. And that's with any creditor, not only a lending institution, but anyone, if a church even has credit cards. You need to make sure that, again, if you're being impacted by COVID-19, you need to make sure that that's well known and well documented, and then approach those lending institutions or either the credit card companies as well. One thing that we've always done, and this has been pretty much throughout my career in underwriting churches, and again, some of it for some churches may be 2020, but we always typically try to underwrite and look at their liquidity and reserves. And typically, we look at 3 to 6 months of operating reserves, and that accounts for 3 to 6 months of their operating expenses. So again, when they hit these situations in the road, they have a cushion to bounce back from, and they can sustain themselves a lot longer. That's very critical. And a lot of times, you get some pushback with what level of reserves do you need? And I'm sure even the pastors get pushback from their leadership at times. Well, how much do we really need as a cushion? But again, those that were wise to that, before, are in a much better situation today with COVID-19. And we've also got a very low interest rate environment. So again, I would encourage all the churches, if they haven't investigated the Paycheck Protection Program, to make sure they investigate that. Again, the SBA program is not one that fits every situation, but it does fit most situations out there. So that's critical that they do that homework to make sure and evaluate the pros and cons. Because again, as the PPP program has been out there, SBA has relaxed a lot of the guidances on that. It used to be that initially the payback period for the payroll was 8 weeks. They just approved going to 24 weeks. And that's a big accommodation because a lot of the institutions were having problems with either hiring staff back or competing with those that were receiving unemployment that might have been a little bit higher than the wages that they would receive back. So again, that flexibility is a welcome sight.
Thank you. Go ahead, George.
Yeah. So I'm gonna shift. I'm gonna say a statement, and I'm gonna tie a question into it. So as we've seen that the predictions on COVID-19 has been all over the place, and and we live in a time where information, in many ways, is kind of been controlled, for lack of a better expression. And now we see kind of the fallout from the attempt to do that, with the numbers rising again. What do we do now? And whoever wants to step in and answer that, what do we do now that we see communities being hit even harder, Black and brown communities especially, with these flares of cases going up, and with really no end in sight? What does that look like for us, as the Black church and as Black communities and Black and brown communities? What does that look like? Anybody who wants to answer that.
I have a thought on this, actually. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Sure.
Were you going to say something? I'm sorry.
No, go right ahead. Ladies first, as my mother told me. I'm a son of the South. You go right on.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
I do believe that as it pertains to the COVID, I think that the church's responsibility right now is to become a hub of education and care. And I don't think you can do one without the other. I think that the church has to decide for itself what's more important. Is it more important for us to go back to what we were doing before and to maintain traditions, or is it more important to create a legacy and focus our interests and our needs on the actual people? You know, a lot of churches are struggling to decide, do we go back to church? And for a lot of different reasons. One, because emotionally and spiritually people want to. There's also a reality that buildings don't pay for themselves, lights don't pay for themselves. You know, the source to maintain things people aren't using, and that's the reality of the way that the system of our churches function. And so for a lot of people, that choice can be really hard. I think for me as a minister, it's not, because the building can wash away and our relationship with God is still going to be there. And so in that role, I think that the church's responsibility is to meet the needs of the people where they are. Sometimes
I think we lost her again, but Pastor Jay, with what she said in mind.
Sure. Thank you so much. So I made reference in my introductory remarks to the Monash Triplex doctrine and the clergy person leading in one or a combination of the three domains, as a prophet, as a priest, or as a royal. To go back and reference the priestly role, now is a time also for, particularly in the African American community, for the priest to step up. I went on record in a very public way as the pastor of St. Joseph, of course, but also as the national chaplain of Alpha Phi Alpha, in writing an open letter commending, if I do say so, our governor for his position. Some groups decided to file suit and said it was an imposition on their First Amendment rights and a violation of this, that, and the other. I'm a former law professor also. I think the judge's ruling, I'll say politely, was hogwash. But there is a tremendous difference in the way worship is conducted and the way retail shopping is conducted when you talk about the propensity to spread COVID-19. When one talks about aerosols being emitted into the environment, when one talks about the possibility of openly sharing the virus in indoor settings, it is much more likely to be shared from singing, from extemporaneous and emotional utterances, and those are than it is from retail shopping. And those are the sort of things that happen primarily in churches, certainly in Black churches that I'm accustomed to. So having said that, the priest in me says, let's listen to science. Let's not go in another direction. Let's be responsible in leading the people that have been assigned to our hand and making sure they are safe. Now, in terms of returning to buildings, I do believe in a gradual process, and I believe I will share with you personally. I have the blessing of some professionals, epidemiologists, medical doctors, nurses, and nurse practitioners. So I have empowered a committee and asked them to advise me. It's our pandemic response team. We are moving forward with deep cleaning and some other precautionary and prophylactic measures to make sure that when we do return to the sanctuary and do return to quote unquote normal worship, whatever that may look like, that the safeguards will be there and that we will absolutely minimize risk. Prayerfully, as I listen to Anthony Fauci, I don't listen to the other guy, the guy that sits at the big chair at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. I listen to Dr. Anthony Fauci, and prayerfully, sometime in the spring, by that time, we will at least have a potential vaccination. But there is no rush to get back into a building. Let me emphasize this. I heard the comment that the lights don't pay for themselves, the building in many cases doesn't pay for itself. I get that too. But again, I reference the electronic convenience of tithing. I also reference the ability to send in a check. No matter how much they tell you the post office is going away, there will be opportunities to mail checks if that's what you want to do, and certainly instantaneous giving through electronic means. Church is not a building. Church, as we go back to its first use in the biblical canon in the Gospel of Matthew, the ecclesia is an assembly. It's a group that comes together. So in other words, we right now are the church. You can have church then, to do it as a verb. You can do church in a parking lot. You can do it in behind somebody's house. You can do it wherever you do it, but you don't have to do it in a space that potentially presents hazards to the body of Christ.
Amen. Amen. Georie, any other questions from you?
I do want to kind of point us for the remainder of our time to, in some ways, what I'm thinking of as saints, the people who we have lost at the hands of the police and violence toward Black and brown bodies due to this nation's historical treatment of our people. How do we pastor and care for our people who might be thinking of the church as reactionary to the Black Lives Matter movement right now, to the defund the police movement? How do you engage with those people who have been waiting for the church to respond and have not seen it yet, in many ways? And there might be churches responding, but the groupthink is looking and is saying, where are you? Is there a response from you on this for us?
I'll go ahead, just very briefly. Again, I go back to my introductory comments of the prophet, the priest, and the royal. When you talk about social movements, whether it be Black Lives Matter or whether it be defund law enforcement, when the prophet is called to speak, the prophet should not be afraid to speak truth to power. One of the things I greatly appreciated about the prophetic leadership provided in the civil rights movement, when African-American ministers obviously were addressing that which was then outside of the African-American community, a very, very unpopular topic, and that was desegregation. That was equal access to facilities, to transportation, et cetera. Unlike, for example, a Rosa Parks, who ran the risk, who as a domestic worker, who ran the risk of someone saying, well, it's okay, Rosa, we don't want you to come tomorrow to watch the kids, to do whatever. Unlike someone who works specifically for, I'll just say non-African Americans, the Black pastor, when the Black pastor serves the Black church, should be in a secure space. because the people will take care of the prophet if the prophet is genuine in his proclamation, his or her proclamation. So that is a liberty that I do not take for granted and I truly enjoy. But my point of reference is that in this time, the prophet should be representing the interests of the whole, not on his own, so to speak. But the prophet should not be afraid to say what thus saith the Lord, is my point. Does that make sense in context?
Yes,
All right.
it does for me. Yeah.
I have something to add to this, if hopefully my internet will stay for once. If the storm is most definitely, it's pitch black, the wind is blowing, so something's going on out there, but we are safe in the house. I actually don't disagree with you, Reverend Augustine, but I do want to add, I think, something that is very pertinent to the conversation, particularly when we start talking about young adults. And one of the things that we have to remember is that in what I've seen within my work, and also in general being a young adult, there are a lot of people who are misinformed about the church's role in the civil rights movement, in my age group and in the groups beyond me. That makes a difference in the way that they see the role of the church in the movement. A lot of them have abandoned the concept of traditional church. And in doing so have resisted the idea that the church even has a role in the role of the civil rights movement at this point, because of the lack of connection, the lack of relationship that is traditionally being found when you speak to young people about their relationship with the church. And when we mean faith leaders, you know, in our civil rights current movements, we're also seeing young people in droves deciding for their own movements, making their own decisions. And there's a lot of lack of unification going on because of that, that I think that the church definitely needs to address, because this is not only, you know, for everyone, but in the terms of the church and the history of the church going forward, where is the church's role about civil rights? A lot of times we see that there is a group of people, talks about how people over the age of 40, so Generation Xers and above, have a completely different faith relationship as it pertains to their role in the church than most people under the age of 40. So that would be millennials and Generation Zers. And so when a lot of people think about what the church does and what the church doesn't do, one, because they're missing the history of the civil rights movement, and two, because of their own personal relationships or lack thereof of a relationship with the church, they don't necessarily see that as a relevant place to start. And for me as a young minister, I think that is most definitely something that I pay a lot of attention to, because although I'm very aware of a lot of the different pieces that go with the civil rights movement from the past, there is some debate and discussion about whether or not it really did as much as they think it did, particularly if we are continuing to fight the same divisiveness and the same issues then that we are having now. It's that now it's more relevant for younger people as a place of violence. And so when we think about the role of the church in that, how do we it's the same question we've been asking for like the last 5 years since I've been in divinity school. How do you get young people to be the church? And how do we make the church make room for those voices? And I think that in general, when we're looking at who is protesting, acting in the riots, who is participating in these emotionally driven places where people are speaking and crying out, it's typically young people who are not thinking about, let me talk to my pastor, or when is my church going to give a response regarding the situations that are going on in the street? And so I think it's important for us to figure out how to engage both the people who want to be the church within the church structure that we have, while also creating space. And sometimes that means for us as the church, taking a back seat and listening to those who are already working and saying, how can we meet you where you are? Instead of the church becoming the place where people have to come to for the leadership to begin. And I think a lot of times, because of the way that church structure is set up, that's not always our strong suit, which is part of the reason why we struggle getting young people engaged on a social activism standpoint within the church, particularly when we think about how active we are outside of that. I heard you mention earlier when we were talking about how does the church get ready for what's coming with COVID and things like that. When we talked about, the different components of where our funds go and the importance of electronic tithing, one of the things that we talk about, particularly with young adults who are interested in faith leadership and faith roles, is that when you talk to young people about where their money goes and what tithing means, people put their money where they feel like the most work is being done. And if we look at statistics, a lot of young people under the age of 35 don't tithe at their church, but if you ask them where their tithes are going, they're going, my tithes are going to Black Lives Matter. My tithes are going to a Black-owned business to actively support directly in the community that which they can actively see as a part of their community.
Let me just take a moment, if I can, to respond to that. I couldn't agree with you more. First, to just address the point of young people giving. Young people, statistically, we know, and certainly from my practical experiences, do not give to brick and mortar structure. You're absolutely right. They give to causes. They give to places and to things that touch the heart and that do good in the community. For all practical purposes, for me, that should be the church. The two should go one and the same. To your comments regarding the over 40 demographic looking and practicing faith in one way and the under 40 demographic in another, I'm going to use two names to give an example to what I want to unpack. And I don't want to get so caught up on the names. I want to get caught up on the movement of what those names represent. And those names are, just as Charles Dickens, I think, wrote, the best of times, the worst of times. The two names I want to give are and Donald J. Trump. Let me unpack this. Barack Obama, the best of times, because we saw the rights that we meaning African Americans and people at large, saw the rights that we fought for come to fruition, the best of times, but the worst of times in terms of church activism, because we did a Rip Van Winkle and took the drug of gradualism because everything must be okay. I'm going to sleep now. Stay woke. So in that regard, I think the church became a place of complacency where, to go to one of Dr. King's famous quotes about the cross having a vertical plane and a horizontal plane, we focused only on the salvific relationship, humanity's relationship with God. We didn't focus on the fact that Jesus said, that which you do unto the least of these here in this plane, you have done also to me. So in that regard, again, Barack Obama was the best of times, the worst of times. Now here the alarm clock has gone off. The alarm clock has gone off and everybody should be woke. And everybody is coming together now in the midst of racial unrest that we thought was dead and gone. But here we are, call the roll of the many, many names, the results of police brutality, call the names of the many bases. As a former Army officer, I was stationed at Fort Bragg, I was stationed at Fort Hood, I was stationed at Fort Benning, all of those Confederate generals, and you have protests, you have attention being given from the Senate Armed Services Committee to change the names of those bases. And here, the man sitting in the White House, absolutely not, I'm not having anything to do with that. So here we have what I think in time we will see as an awakening, as a great awakening, because the church is becoming mobilized and engaged again as it was back then. It took then and it has taken now the outside impetus to have the prophet again go into those leadership domains, but to have the prophet speak. But I think you will see active engagement in church participation. I think you will see the church more so on the social justice side of things than simply on the worship, the praise and worship side of things. And I think you will see young people gravitating to social justice oriented ministers and those ministers who have a prophetic voice to attract their concerns about doing good in the community. Does that make sense, I hope?
Yes, thank you. Thank you. We are getting close to our time to close. So I would like to see if there are any last comments from any of our panelists. I've checked and I don't think we have any questions from our participants so far. We may have questions because there are other people. This will be on Facebook Live as well as YouTube. live, recorded, of course, and it'll be accessible to people who were not able to join us this evening. So any last comments? Mr. Sansom, any last comments from you? Or
Sure.
resources, any information that you can share with us that we can pass on?
Sure. Again, as I stated, we do have a webinar tomorrow for nonprofits and faith institutions. And Tammy, I think I provided that to you early in the week. So again, those who are interested in learning more about the Paycheck Protection Program, please take it and make it your time to attend. I think we can take up to 500 attendees on this one Zoom site. So hopefully, I know it's been receiving good response thus far. And again, as Pastor Augustine has said, I'm optimistic, and I think we also have to be grateful that in a city like Durham, one of the places that was the birthplace of a Wall Street, that we still have an African-American bank and Mechanics and Farmers Bank, and we have a self-help credit union. I hate to think in some cities where you don't have a presence like that, the opportunities that would fall alongside of the road. Again, those two institutions, we're lucky to have them. They both have longevity and they both have excellent records. So again, I'm very optimistic. There's still a lot of great deal of uncertainty in the market because we don't know the duration and we don't know the magnitude of this pandemic. We just continue to pray and take each day and do the best we can. And again, every person makes a difference. So make a difference in your own way. And I appreciate the time spending with the other panelists, and I appreciate the work that Durham Cares continues to do in the community.
Thank you, and we did receive your information and have placed it on our website.
Great.
Pastor Jay and Minister Amber, do you have anything that you'd like to share, any resources, any last minute comments before we close out for the evening?
Minister Amber, I would defer to you.
I literally just got back on, but I want to say thank you guys for having me. I'm so sorry we've been having technical difficulties. I just want to say that it's a couple of things I never got to finish that I think are really important for churches to know. One of those things is that it's a part of our plan for reopening. I think it's going to be really important for us to pay attention to the level of grace that people are bringing in with them. This time, for some people, has been a time of rest, and for other people, it has been a time of severe trauma, not just because life has changed so drastically for them, but also because they have lacked the resources prior to the coronavirus to deal with their emotional places, and that's part of what the church has done for them. And then on the other, because being at home for long periods of time and being isolated from people brings its own set of challenges. Financial resources are limited. And just the reality that at any point, something could happen that you're not in control of leaves a lot of people in states of complex grief. For our children who are coming back, a lot of them are experiencing forms of trauma that they have never seen. Parents have high anxiety. People who are single, who live alone, are experiencing extreme bouts of depression. And I don't know that our churches are always equipped for that. And so I want us to keep that in mind as we start planning with our transition boards and our different panels about how are we going to reopen, what is our plan, that we think about the mental health of the people who are coming in. When people are not well emotionally, they can't be well spiritually because we can't hear God in that regard. And so I just want us to keep that in mind. Also, when we're thinking about resources, as we think about going forward, as we're planning for that process, as an outreach coordinator, one of the things that I think that we are that on is we can create the totality of what we need within the community if we're willing to look at those resources. On Facebook, there's a ton of groups all of a sudden that are like Black everything, Black businesses, Black this, Black that. But as Black churches, we needed those resources all along. And so I think it's going to be so important going forward to make sure that we're looking for resources that within our community that help to edify both financially, emotionally, and spiritually people who are already in the community. So finding resources for Black therapists, looking for food sources through Black agriculture, making sure that we're looking and thinking about how we process information with other Black people, and creating that room for an interchurch dialogues about what different churches need. not every church has to offer the same stuff. Sometimes coming to the table with other churches and grouping together to say, here are our strong points, here are someone else's strong points. Let's partner and focus on individual needs will allow us to utilize and share more resources in our community than trying for every church to be a one-stop stop for all of its members. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Pastor Jay.
Hey, I want to close by also sharing the sentiment of thanks. I'm very grateful for the invitation to participate this evening. I certainly have enjoyed the dialogue. I look forward to future and continued collaboration with you. And again, the tone I want to set is one of optimism by sharing that this is a wonderful opportunity for people to come together. I think it was Dr. King who wrote while he was on the front lines of protests, incarcerated in Birmingham, Alabama, and he wrote a letter from Birmingham jail. Either we will come together as brothers, in this case, brothers and sisters, or we will fail as fools. So this is a time for us all to work together collaboratively, to share our resources, and to put America back on its best foot in terms of reconciliation and working with one another. But thank you so much for the opportunity to be with you this evening.
Well, thank each of you. And next week, we will also have not next week, I keep saying next week, the 24th, we will have our second discussion. And please check our website, or if you have people that are interested, please go to the website and register for that particular webinar coming next week. Again, thank you all. Bless each of you, your ministries, the work that you do, and go in the love and peace of Christ. Georie, any other comments before I close it out?
No, ma'am.
All right. We'll go with Christ. Thank you.